Coming to you from Austin, Texas on this sunshiny day, it's Color Commentary. We are Adrian Guarzales.
And Michael Petchek.
So F&M was sweet. We both went 2-2. We were 2-2 bros.
Yeah, a couple of grizzly bears. But we both got to test stuff out. We actually, anyone who follows us on Twitter actually already saw this. But I tested out Renegade Freighter in Stompy, and you tested out
Gear Seeker Serpent in Affinity. And, speaking of the losses, I don't think that was due to the cards we were playing. I think those cards were very strong when we were able to cast them. I think, I can look back at the two matches I lost, and I remember the moment I lost, and it was just misplays on my part. It had nothing to do with Gear Seeker Serpent for me.
Yeah, I don't think... Yeah, no, there was no point where Renegade Freighter actively lost me a game. And when it mattered, oh man, that card is good. That card is actually really good.
And to sort of follow up on Gear Seeker, I didn't really have a lot of success casting it on Friday night, but then I did a stream on Saturday, and I just beat face with Gear Seeker. That card is so strong.
So how many games was it just sitting in your hand where you just couldn't cast it?
One, and that was a game I lost to that... Reckless Kitty deck, Boros Reckless Kitty deck.
Yep.
And I had to mulligan to 5, and I had it in my opener.
Okay.
That was the only time. It's way easier to cast than I think people sort of thought it was.
What about at F&M? Were there any moments where you couldn't cast it there?
No, there was never a moment where, I was able to cast it a few times. One of them I was already behind, so it didn't really help as much as I was hoping. My opponent had a bunch of flyers. And then another game where I drew it, I was able to cast it, but I was at 1 life. My opponent had an Angler and a Delver. And so it wasn't going to save. No creature was going to save me there, basically. But it was very, very easy to cast. There was no game where I drew it and just sat in my hand for several turns. I was able to cast it pretty much immediately.
So first round, I actually got to cast Renegade Freighter. And my opponent only had sorcery speed removal, and oh my god, it's such a house against like Journey to Nowhere and stuff like that, just because they can't interact with it at all. Like, it's just really difficult to interact with. And in Stompy, where, your only other artifacts or enchantments are 4 copies of Rancor, it doesn't feel great to bring in like naturalize and disenchant effects against this.
Right.
Like, I don't know. I was very impressed by it. I don't think it's like amazing and like is going to make Stompy tier 0 or anything, but every time I got it on board, it felt really solid.
Yeah, we there's a list kicking around that I would like to try out with Freighter in it.
Yeah, well, do we just want to dive into it? We've covered F&M.
Yeah, I was actually referring to a different deck, but yeah, that's a great segue into our deck tech of the week, which is Deluxekoff's Pauperganda's mono black aggro deck starring the Freighter as well as another spicy Kaladesh card. Kaladesh, very strong set overall is what Mike and I think. Very, very, it's going to have a huge impact on the format.
Yeah, I think the best thing is it didn't introduce anything that breaks the format or is like inherently warping, but it was just a bunch of really solid cards that actually interact well with the format.
And before we get into this deck, I would like to say Deluxe does have a stream of this somewhere. So
I believe it made it to YouTube.
Yeah, so it'll be on his YouTube channel. You can check it out after you're done listening to us.
And it got so this deck got piloted 5.0 by MTGO user _ZZZ.
The Z, if you will.
And so mono black aggro has been around for a while. Like it's kind of this very
10.
Yeah, it's always kind of been a little lackluster, but it brought a couple cards.
The problem that it's traditionally had is its creatures are all very weak, and Dark Ritual is inherent card disadvantage. So they'll cast like 3 2/2s, and then being an affinity player, I'll bolt 1 and then cast a 4/4, and then they can't win the game anymore.
Yeah, the big issue is always like your creatures got outclassed really quickly. Like, you could have very explosive opening hands that kind of couldn't. You could get your opponent down to like 4 and then couldn't close out the game.
Right.
So Let's start off. Let's walk us through the creatures.
So first we have 3 Bonded Constructs, which is a Magic Origins creature that's a 2/1 for 1 that cannot attack or block, I believe, alone.
Yep. Really the name of the game with this deck is 2 power, 1 casting cost creatures or better.
Right. Our next creature is Carnophage, which used to be one of my favorite cards, actually, back when I played a lot of casual mono black aggro decks. That was sort of how I got started playing Magic. It's a 2/2 for 1, and on your upkeep, you have to pay a life or tap it.
Yep, and it has fantastic art. Like, it's got very sort of creepy old Magic art.
It's like a skinned zombie. It's really, really awesome. Next, we have 4 Carrion Feeder, which is a 1/1 for B, cannot block, but sacrifice a creature, give it +1/+1 counter.
Yeah.
Then we have a new Kaladesh card, Night Market Lookout, which has, whenever this is tapped, deals 1 damage. Or does it drain, or does it actually deal
I believe
damage?
It drains, actually.
Okay, so they lose a life. That's important because it's sort of a pulse tracker effect, which our next card is 4 copies of Pulse Tracker, which is essentially the same thing, except it's on attack, not tap.
Yes, and that's kind of what's making this list stand out, is it kind of has a density of these Pulse Tracker effects. Like, we're finally getting enough of them where all together they kind of add up to something good.
Right, and the very next one is Stormbow Archer, which is also from Origins. I believe it's a 1/2.
It is.
That does a point of damage to each player who does not control an elf when it attacks.
Which does have some weird relevance because elves is still a deck in this format, but most of the time it's not going to matter.
Next we have Vampire Lacerator, which is kind of an upgraded version of Carnophage. It's a vampire that's a 2/2, except you lose the life every turn unconditionally unless your opponent is at 10 or less life.
Yeah, so this guy is really great once you've got your opponent kind of a little on the ropes. It suddenly is just a 2/2 for 1.
Next, we have 2 copies of Barrow Ghoul. And Mike, I actually do not remember what this does. Will you please remind me?
So 1 and a black for a 4/4, which is just an absurd body to put on something for that cost. But it has the caveat of, at the beginning of your upkeep, exile the top creature card from your graveyard or sacrifice Barrow Ghoul. So definitely more of a late game thing once some stuff has already died incidentally from combat. But it is giving you a 4/4 for 2, and I think the only other deck that really gets quite that rate is Affinity.
Right. The only other card I can think of is Carapace Forger. I'm not counting Mere Enforcer because that is sometimes just free.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
And then we have 4 of Shepherd of Rot. It's a 1 and a black for a zombie that taps and deals damage to each player. Yeah.
I think it's actually life loss for what it's worth.
Yeah.
But it's equal to the number of zombies in play.
Well, that actually is very relevant because Circle Protection Black does not stop that.
Yes. So then, like, moving into the spells, the first thing off the bat, 4 Dark Ritual. And Dark Ritual is kind of a cornerstone of this deck because it lets you just kind of hand dump turn 1.
Right.
So it kind of remove, like, any of their single target removal suddenly can't really deal with the whole board.
Right. So yeah, the idea is Dark Ritual and then 3 2-drops or 3 1-drops. 3 2-drops. Then we have Foul Tongue Shriek, which is essentially Hell Rider on an instant.
Well, it drains, doesn't it?
Does it also drain? All right.
I believe it actually drains 1 black, and your opponent loses 1 life for each attacking creature. You gain 1 life for each attacking creature.
And this is sort of like you alpha strike with all of your Pulse Tracker guys. So this is 6 damage if you have 1 of each of the Pulse Tracker guys, because you'll attack them, you'll trigger the Pulse Tracker style ability, and then you can play this, and that's 6 damage before you've even actually dealt any combat damage.
Yep. Then we got 1 copy of Renegade Freighter. For those of you who may have forgotten in the time past since our Kaladesh review, 3 generic. It is a vehicle. It's a 4/3. It has crew 2, so you got to tap 2 power worth of creatures. Preferably probably those Night Market Lookouts, so that you ping them for 2.
Or Carnophage on your upkeep, as we were discussing earlier.
Yes, because Carnophage does have a trigger that goes on the stack. You can tap it in response and then choose not to pay 1 life.
Right.
But it is a 4/3. When it attacks, it gets +1/+1 and trample. And a 5/4 is a pretty significant body. And then we got 4 main deck copies of Snuff Out.
This is just a punch through.
Yeah. Snuff Out, 3 and a black. Actually, I don't think I've ever hard cast this. Destroy target non-black creature, but it does have, instead of paying its mana cost, if you control a swamp, you can pay 4 life and cast it for free.
And speaking of swamps, there are 14 of them in this deck.
Yeah, no, super, super low land count. So your ideal here, I think, is like 1, maybe 2 swamps, dark ritual, and then gas.
Yeah. Because they're so terrible. Past like the second one, they're just awful.
Yeah, you really do not want to flood out with this deck. We were actually talking. One of the other interesting things about this is you could like turn 1 swamp into dark ritual into renegade freighter. Turn 2, just play one of your 1 mana 2 power creatures, and then crew up and swing in for 5 turn 2.
So one thing I would like to point out about this list in particular is there are less 2 power creatures in this deck than there are typically in the mono black beatdown decks. Most of the time they play Dothy Horror and Dothy Slayer.
Yep.
And so they have, but those are those are 2 drops.
Mm-hmm.
And then the Pump Knights. In this deck, there are actually only 7. They're the 4 Carnophages and the 3 Bonded Construct.
Also the Lacerators, the
right.
Barrow Ghouls.
Oh, you're right. I'm just an idiot. I'm just they're so the creatures in this list are less beefy, but they get through more damage overall because of the on attack triggers.
Yeah. They have like a pseudo evasion effect where
right.
Even if they die in combat, you still hit your opponent for a little bit. Then like the sideboard is the only area of this deck I think could really, really use some work, just because it is kind of a sort of prototypical sideboard. We got 4 copies of Disciple of the Vault, 1 black for 1/1, drains your opponent for 1 life every time an artifact leaves play or goes to the graveyard from play.
I think that must be for affinity.
Yes, because if you kind of knock them down to like 10 or so, actually probably a little less, it becomes really hard for them to use the ATOG combo. It also punishes, Chromatic Star incidentally. All sorts of like little interactions there. 4 copies of Gut Shot, so it's always just pay 2 life, deal 1 damage to target creature or player.
Maybe this is in here for Soul Sisters, right?
It also it's good for Delver.
Right.
It's very good for Delver. It can also just ping your opponent out if you can get them to 1. Like,
yeah.
I think this is a deck where that is a non-irrelevant part of that card. 4 copies of Shrivel. Now, Shrivel's interesting because it does kill some of the stuff in this deck.
Right. It's -1/-1 all creatures for 1 of the black. A functional reprint of Nausea. Not Nausea?
Yes. Nausea.
Nausea? Okay, whatever.
If we keep saying it, it's just going to get worse.
Nausea. I don't know. Tell us in the comments.
But maybe I know that there is a more expensive version of this that I think is a common, Fester Gloom. It's 2 and a black. All non-black creatures get -1/-1, but the catch there is you got to get to 3 mana.
I think that might be an uncommon.
You think it might be an uncommon?
I'm not 100%. We would have to look it up.
I want to say that there's a 3 mana your opponent's creatures get -1/-1, but it's just...
There's one in Kaladesh, but that is definitely an uncommon.
Yes.
So
I don't know. I could be completely wrong on this, but Shrivel just hits a decent amount of the stuff in this deck. And I think that's like a non-zero thing to consider because... Yes, this does help your elves matchup quite a bit. And I think that's what it's in there for. But it's not without its downside.
And then the final card on the sideboard is super spicy. It is Spinning Darkness, which is 2 black, 4 mana, deal 3 damage to target non-black creature, you gain 3 life. Alternate casting cost, exile the top 3 black cards in your graveyard.
Which actually I hadn't realized this. It's kind of like Black's Fire Blast, where it's just you're never going to see this cast for its mana cost.
Right.
But it does match up pretty favorably. If you have 3 black cards in the bin, this is a free bolt that gains you 3 life.
But it doesn't go face, which is the only thing I don't like about it.
Yeah, I mean it's not perfect, but we're already running it's already running 4 copies of Black's main free removal spell, Snuff Out. So I think this is just kind of, it's not Snuff Out, but it does a decent impression of it.
Right.
But no, this seems like a pretty solid list. Like I think we've finally got the density of pulse trackers and pulse tracker effects.
And if you would like to play this list today, it will really only cost you $14.58 on Moto or $13.51 in paper. And I want to say most of that is going to be Snuff Out on Moto because I think Snuff Out's like $3.
Yeah, it's not cheap in paper either, but like
$13.51.
Yeah.
That's cheap.
I'm just saying most of it is the snuff out. Now, in terms of building a collection from the cards here, a decent amount of this is kind of this deck only.
Right. The only one I could really see some serious crossover are the snuff outs, the freighter, disciples. The sideboard all seems pretty portable.
Yeah.
Those are all sideboard cards that are played in other decks.
So, on the bright side, while this is kind of a deck where a lot of these cards are fairly unique to this sort of style of deck, you're at least getting it for a very cheap price. It's not like, it's not like some of the lists, like, for example, we covered Turbo Fog last week, which is actually kind of pricey and really doesn't have a lot of crossover with other decks.
Right.
This one is just for what? What is $13 the analog of? Like, for the cost of like what? 4 booster packs?
1 Shockland? I don't know.
1 Shockland? Yeah. I mean, this is a dirt cheap list. If it interests you, I'd say just pick it up. You'll have fun with it.
I'm thinking about doing it. Mono Black Aggro will always have a special place in my heart. My very first Magic deck I put together, my friend gave me his collection. I took out all the black cards and I was like, these Dothy dudes go really good with this hatred card. How could this possibly go wrong? And so therefore the deck that no one wanted to play against in my casual group was born. People were like, I'll play with you, but not if you play that deck. It's so OP. We got to ban all those shadow cards.
I mean, were you running like rituals so you could like ritual hatred on like turn 2?
Yeah.
Okay.
It was pretty sweet.
But yeah, moving on to the maybe board. We got a card where I suggested this last night, and then this morning I'm looking at the 5-0 results from last night, and it actually was in one of the lists.
But it's a very typical maybe board card. It's a gold card that only goes in certain decks, and it is soul manipulation. And what does that do?
1, a black and a blue, counter target creature spell, return target creature card from your graveyard to your hand. So this is literally a remove. It's choose one or both.
Right, you don't have to do both.
You don't need the target in your graveyard, or you don't need a spell to counter.
Yeah, it's a really sweet spell. It's an inherent 2-for-1.
And it's just a remove soul stapled to a raise dead.
Right, but because it's one card, it's better than the two of them alone.
Yeah. So where does this fit? Like this is pretty clearly like grindy control.
The only place you mentioned like a blue-black Forbidden Alchemy deck. I've really only ever seen this card in Teachings and maybe sometimes Angler Delver, but I don't think they really care about this card that much. It might be like a 1 of or 2 of in Teachings.
But I think, for a deck like Teachings or the blue-black Forbidden Alchemy, which is basically Teachings with slightly
no Teachings.
Yeah, it's basically teachingless Teachings. That's really where its home is. When you're threat light, so you want to be able to get back your threats to close out the game, and you also want to be able to counter creatures so those threats can get through.
Right. And so the ideal target for this spell is Gurmag Angler.
Yes. Yeah.
That's pretty much the best target
on both ends.
Yeah.
Like getting back your own angler and then countering your opponent's angler, that feels pretty good.
Yeah.
Or like countering their Muldrift or get back your angler. Like, I definitely feel like, I don't know. Part of me says, it's great because it's a 2-for-1, right? You get 2 effects out of it, and both of those are good effects that people run anyway in varying values.
Yeah, you deny a creature and then you recur your own threat. It's very powerful.
The catch is like how often, like I can definitely see situations where you just kind of need the emergency like counter spell.
Right. This is a 3-drop, so you can't hold it up on turn 2 like you could in Remove Soul, which is why I think it's not a 4 of. And also a lot of Teachings decks are going away from the Angler plan.
Yeah, a lot more of them you see kind of going towards the creatureless plan where it's just kind of, I'm going to mill you out or I'm going to hit you with justice over and over. But this seems like a really solid hit for a blue-black control deck that wants sort of a level of inevitability. Just like being able to counter a late game creature and get back one of your own just seems really powerful.
And of course, Teachings is a toolbox deck. You could totally run this in your Teachings deck.
Yeah, one of,
Yeah, that's one of the great things about Teachings. It's a very, very, very customizable deck because there's so many powerful instants in our format that you can Teachings for. Yeah. So, I don't think it's ever going to be a bad card in that list.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of wish
personal taste.
I kind of wish that this was like just a counter spell, but it would probably be too good at that point.
Yeah, that'd be extremely strong.
That would be to the point where I'd start brewing around this. That actually kind of transfers into our next topic. So today's topic is brewing. We've kind of covered it on the show before, like is Pauper a brewer's format? But now we kind of want to talk about how you go about it.
Right. Brewing is a very rigorous process. And of course, there's, we're going to outline some basic steps, obviously find your own path, but you do need to apply some sort of rigor to whatever procedure you're going to use for brewing decks.
Yeah. So when you're starting off with a brew, there's kind of two places to start. Either you start goal oriented, where you're saying, I want to do X with this deck. Like, as a topical example, I want to be able to beat Drake with this deck.
That was the first thing I thought of too, actually.
Yeah. Or you start with a card or a handful of cards that are interesting and maybe have some crossplay between them. Like, for example, a while ago I brought up that we can now run up to 12 versions of Oromancer effects now between Oromancer, Monk Idealist,
yes,
and Ironclad Slayer, which is a narrow Oromancer, but still an Oromancer style effect. And they're all at the 3-drop slot. So you kind of have to, if you're starting with like a card or a pool of cards, that's kind of, your build around, right? You see something and you're like, I want to make a deck where this works. But those are kind of your two starting points. And personally, when I start brewing, I like to write stuff down by hand. I don't know. That's just me. Like, I enjoy having like a physical list, in part because I'm paranoid about other people seeing it, but And
just to be clear, there are other ways to approach brewing. Like, I'm a nuts and bolts spike would be my psychological profile. I only tinker with established decks. What we're referring to here is starting from total scratch. Like want to, like what Mike is saying, but you can tinker with established decks, and I would call that brewing as well.
Yeah, I mean, especially if you kind of take it on a pretty big departure. Like if you're changing one or two cards, that's kind of, tinkering more. But if you're getting to the point where it's like 10 cards have changed, then you're kind of getting more towards the brewing end of things, right, where you're like, yes, this technically fits within this archetype, but...
And another thing is, speaking of that, it's fine if you're like, I want my cards to be Muldrift or Lightning Bolt and Counterspell.
Yeah, those are good cards. Like, there's no reason you shouldn't play mainstream, like, popular cards.
Right.
Like, I definitely want to, like, emphasize, like, I feel like in the community, there's kind of a split between people who are, like, very spiky and very brewy. And I see, like, a decent amount of vitriol from both sides where it's like, oh, I don't like people who net deck, and oh, why would you play a brew? Just play a better deck. Neither of those points are dreadfully helpful to the community.
Truth, as always, is somewhere in the middle.
Yeah. Yeah. But so once you've kind of got your idea, your seed of an idea, right? Where do you go from there? Like, I would go into research. So, you gotta, so like, if we're starting with a card and there's a card I really want to brew around.
Let's pick a card. Let's make this a hard example.
Let's go with the Oromancer effects.
Okay, let's go.
Because I've thought about that one a decent amount.
So we want a deck where Oromancer is our engine.
Yeah. So I personally, my first tool that I use is magiccards.info. I think the interface is cleaner than Gatherer, and I think as long as they keep updating it on time, I just prefer it outright to Gatherer. There's plenty of phone-based apps with search functions that are pretty competent, and you can brew on the go. I'm an Android person. I like a Decked Builder. I think the full version is like $4, but it is worth it.
I'm also an Android person trapped in an iPhone.
Yeah. But, you want to go searching. All right, so Oromancer gets back an enchantment from your graveyard, right? Where do we go from there? What enchantments do we want to be bringing back? Hit me with some ideas that are just off the top of the head.
That one where whenever a creature dies, you can put it back on the battlefield.
Oh, Angelic Renewal.
Yeah.
Okay. So Angelic Renewal creates a loop where your Oromancer keeps coming back if you want it to, and the Angelic Renewal goes back to hand.
Right. And also, what's the other one? Shade's Presence?
Shade's Presence, that's the aura for 1 and 2 black.
Yeah, is that what it's called? Shade's Presence? And then
Shade's Form.
Shade's Form, okay.
There we go. Okay, so that helps us recur them. All right, so if we're going to go down a grindy route, there's also a Font of Return. 1 in a black, enchantment, 3 in a black, sacrifice Font of Return, return up to 3 creature cards from your graveyard to your hand.
And then what? Well, okay, so we have ways to recur our Auramancer, and we have these sweet enchantments that help us do that. What are some? Does Auramancer return all enchantments or just auras? It's all enchantments.
All
right?
enchantments.
All right.
Despite the name, it was printed before auras were a thing when they were still enchant creatures.
What's a sweet enchantment creature from Theros that we could use Auramancer for?
All right. So we've already got white and black, right?
Yes.
So we're pretty solidly in those 2 colors. Like black's giving us the recursion for creatures, and white's giving us the recursion for enchantments.
Right.
We could try out Grim Guardian. Grim Guardian is from Journey into Nyx. It is, I believe, 2 in a black, maybe 3 in a black for a 1/3 or a 1/4, and it has Constellation. When this enters the battlefield or another enchantment enters the battlefield, you drain your opponent for 1.
Yeah, it's a 3-drop 1/4.
Okay, so that's got a nice defensive body on it, and it rewards us every time an enchantment comes into play, right? So now we've got like a way to deal damage to our opponent and kind of hopefully close out the game.
In a very grindy fashion.
Yeah,
but because we have Constellation, we're constantly looping our Auramancer and we're constantly looping that enchantment. We're going to be able to do a lot of damage to our opponent over the course of the game.
Yeah, and if we have 4 of these, if we've got 2 of them out, our clock doubles.
Right.
Very efficiently. There's also a 1/4, which is a pretty decent body on the ground, right?
Like for 3, which is not terrible.
Survives most red removal besides, what's the one I'm thinking of? Flame Slash.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've got that. So we've got, a really slow win con. We've got this kind of grindy engine here. What else can we toss in here?
We could toss in just any sort of utility auras. We could play Pacifism, Fate's Fetters, Tortured Existence, maybe, so that we can have some recursion on our Auramancer. It's just
yeah. I like Fate's Fetters. Fate's Fetters means that we can lock stuff down and also gain life to kind of stabilize a little. It hits any permanent. You could toss it on, say, one of the new vehicles and stop people from crewing it.
We could also play runes in our deck so that we have protection from maybe some of the more aggressive decks. We can cycle them and then recur them later with our Auramancer if we need to.
Ooh, okay. So actually, let me veer off. So right now we're white-black, right?
Right.
Let me hit you with this. One of my pet weird interactions that I've seen that I really want to be good. There's a card, Protective Sphere, 1 in a white, and then it's an enchantment, and it has the ability 1 generic, pay 1 life, prevent all damage from a source of your choice as long as that source shares a color with the mana you spent on this. Now, that on its own, would be good in 5 color, right?
Mm-hmm.
What if we add in green? Give us a little bit of ramp in the form of Utopia Sprawl, and also color fixing in Abundant Growth.
All right.
Because now Abundant Growth turns like a singleton Protective Sphere into a just pay 1 mana, reduce all damage from a source to 1.
Is there an enchantment we can use to regain some life also? Guardian doesn't actually.
It just pings them?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, you mentioned Faith's Fetters.
That's true.
Faith's Fetters seems interesting. And if we're playing Abundant Growth, then we kind of edge into like 4 or 5 color range. Like
5 color enchantments. All right.
Yeah. And we're definitely going like a little deep on this, right? But like you could run, say, Curse of the Pierced Heart as a source of damage.
Yeah.
You could
play Curse of the Bloody Tome.
You can play Curse of the Bloody Tome, although that kind of goes counter. Actually, no, you don't want to curse yourself.
Right.
Actually, now that if we're going to go into green, that gives us access to Commune with the Gods.
Rancor.
The Yavimaya Enchantress and Orin Arlid. Krufix's Insight, which lets you look at the top 6 and pick up to 3 enchantments from it and put the rest in the bin.
So now we've got this Abzan Enchantress deck.
Yeah, which we can, in theory, splash any color into.
Right. Maybe our sideboard takes some,
Yeah, we can take some sweet liberties, like, I don't know, like run a one of, like, Hydroblast or something like that.
Yeah.
And actually, if we're going into a bunch of colors, I kind of like tossing in Crumbling Vestige.
Yeah.
Because not only does it let us play all these other colors when we don't have an abundant growth, you can slap an abundant growth on it.
Right, and then it becomes any color land.
Yeah.
Right, so we have our theme of this Enchantress deck.
Yeah.
So we've done our research. Now we should test it.
All right.
Right?
So testing is the big thing with Pauper. Like, we're a pretty established format. Like, Delver is always going to be in the top 5 decks, probably. I feel comfortable saying that.
Mm-hmm.
And like Stompy's always going to be pretty reasonable. We're Affinity.
This is the tuning phase. We're gonna have to tune our deck to beat these other decks out there. We definitely need to tune it to beat Drake. We know that.
Yes. So with this list, we're a little slow.
Seal of Doom.
Yeah, Seal of Doom loops. It's instant speed. It is uncounterable. I mean, they could like capsize it away or something like that if they could combo out after that. But there's, that's a possibility.
Yeah. So you need to test against a gauntlet of decks, basically. It helps if you have friends.
Yep.
Or a group, a play testing group. And you can run this through the gauntlet basically and see where the deck is weak and where it is strong.
Yeah, and I cannot emphasize enough. Keep testing your brews. Like, you do not want to go, okay, I've played 5 matches with this and I've won all of them. This is good.
Right.
You want to clock serious hours with this deck.
And in our show notes here, you want to check your win-loss ratios. You want to take note of what cards are good versus what cards are bad versus what cards consistently beat you. And so to sort of put a point on it, our favorite deck, Pig Trinket, is a brew, right?
Yeah.
Like that deck is very solidly
rogue as hell.
Yeah, but it was refined to perfection by its creator, Power T, into the deck it is today, which is why you see that deck isn't very flexible because Power T spent so much time on it. He's like, I'm confident these are the optimal 75 cards for this deck.
Yeah, and I think a big thing with brewing for Pauper is just like record as many notes as you can. I would say like you definitely want your win-loss ratio sorted by the decks you were against. So like, oh, like my global win ratio is about 50%. But this one matchup is almost a guaranteed slam dunk, and this matchup is miserable.
Right. Like
you want to be able to quantify like, where am I having issues? Another thing that people sometimes forget about, record your sideboards. Like every time you play a match with your brew, be like, I took this out, I put this in. How did it feel to me? Like,
yeah.
Do I feel like I made the right choice here? Like, and ideally what you want is like to figure out like, was this sideboard card just a slam dunk in this matchup? Like, kind of a Gorilla Shaman versus Affinity kind of deal. Like,
yeah. Is it going to win the matchup X% of the time?
And versus like, running a disenchant against Affinity, which can help, but it's
terrible.
Yeah. Like, I mean, I'm not going to say it's never going to win a game against Affinity. Like in the right situation, sure. Like if you need to like remove a blocker for lethal, sure. But there's definitely like a big gap between those two because you play Affinity. How bad does Gorilla Shaman turn 1 look?
I hope I have a removal spell. Yeah. Basically, I hope I have a removal spell.
Yeah, like if you don't have that removal spell, what do you do?
Well, the thing about Gorilla Shaman too. Well, I'm digressing. I won't talk about it.
You don't want to talk about the shaman?
Well, okay, I'll just say it because people are going to ask me what I was going to say. If most people play Gorilla Shaman like turn 3. So that way they can still blow up your lands and you can't really answer it.
That's true. But, there are varying qualities of sideboard cards. And usually the correlation is like broader answers are less impactful. Narrow answers can just tank a matchup. Like against Boggle's Serene Heart, the 1 and a green destroy all auras. That can be a doozy of a sideboard
card. That might not go into our Absent Enchantress deck.
Probably not. But, you do want to be paying attention to your sideboard because you're playing a 60 card deck with a 15 card sideboard, but a better way to think about it is you're playing a 75 card deck.
Right.
You got to make sure that all 75 actually fit and work and, they all kind of click together. Actually, for the Enchantress thing, Deadweight's probably a good pick.
Oh yeah, Deadweight's really good. Yeah, you got, and so yeah, a deck like this, it's like you get to run a toolbox kind of.
Yeah.
It actually sounds pretty fun. Maybe we should actually brew this deck together.
I've been working on this for so long, ever since Yavimaya Enchantress got spoiled. It's just so tricky to figure out. Like, we talk not infrequently about stuff we want downshifted. Sterling Grove would make this a slam dunk.
Sterling Grove, doesn't that give all of your enchantments hexproof and then you sack it to go get or Shroud?
It gives them Shroud and you can sack it to get another enchantment out of your deck.
That is not getting downshifted, Mike.
It's not.
I hate to break it to you.
It would be
Isn't
nutty.
It a rare?
No, it's an uncommon.
It's an uncommon? Okay. It's from Invasion?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a good card.
Actually, also like any of the Ghostly Prison effects. Even like a Ghostly Prison for 1 would make this deck way better.
Yeah.
Like even if it was like 4 mana.
What about if Elephant Grass was a common?
I don't remember what Elephant Grass does. I know it's a prison style effect.
It's like Ghostly Prison, yeah. Except black creatures just can't attack you. And it is fading. But it's still really good.
I thought it had cumulative upkeep.
Maybe it does. Maybe it has cumulative upkeep. Yeah, I don't know.
But
what a card. What a card.
Yeah, returning to, the point. Testing is so important. And like, you don't just want to go through like each deck once. You want to be like, okay, I'm going to test against each, tier 1 deck. I'm going to see how I do. I'm going to make alterations.
Yeah, you're collecting data to better your deck. So you're just doing yourself a disservice if you don't go through a rigorous testing process.
Yeah. It should go with saying, if the first run through the gauntlet is just all 0-2 losses, you might want to examine it. You might want to step back and be like, is this good?
This is actually a pretty key part of brewing. A lot of brewers, rightfully so, get very attached to their pet ideas, but you have to be willing to say, my idea didn't work.
Yeah, like sometimes you just got to be like, nope, this seemed better on paper. Now that I'm actually sitting here doing it, nope, doesn't work.
Right, like if you're consistently losing without having done anything the whole game, then you should reevaluate your. I mean, and I'm not saying give up immediately. Like, definitely reevaluate your card choices, see if there's better things that could slot in there. I wouldn't say throw in the towel immediately, but I think keeping a critical eye on your own deck and being aware, just try and be aware and see if your deck is actually good enough.
So there are definitely some decks where I have kind of pulled the plug a little early. For example, I was fidgeting for a long time with the Ivy Lane Denizen combo deck.
Yeah.
I think it's just bad. Like, I tried it like multiple times over the course of a couple months, and I was just like, I think that this is just not a good deck. I think we're missing a piece here, and until we get that piece, I can just shelf this. That's another thing, though. Don't throw away your list. Like, even if a brew burns out in a week, and you're just like, this is terrible, hang on to the list. We keep getting cards for this format. Like
Kaladesh, very, very strong set.
Yeah, like Kaladesh has got, the gears a turning in no pun intended.
Wink.
Yeah. It's terrible.
Oh yeah, Gear Seeker's nickname, Gyarados. I remembered it today. I forgot.
Oh yeah.
Gray Merchant's already Gary, but Geary and
Gary.
Yeah. Gyarados.
But, hang on to these ideas because sometimes, like, again, circling back to that mono black list, it finally got a decent density of pulse tracker effects that let it push through a little bit more damage.
Yeah, and then the Express, the Freighter.
Yes.
Is so strong. That card's going to be around.
And I think you always, and this is part of the reason why I like doing a lot of my brewing on paper, is because that way there's no delete button. Like, yeah, I can tear a page out of my notebook, but I just like having it there so I can be like, oh man, I remember there was like, when you're looking at spoilers, you can be like, wait a second, I brewed something that would like this. And then you go back and you go, all right, so I could pop in like 3 of this new card, take out these 3 cards. Would that work? So it's really important that, you keep all of this information and try to keep it organized. For recording your win-losses, paper works. I might advocate, using Google Sheets or Excel.
Right.
I personally like Google Sheets because, if you're playing paper, you can be somewhere without a computer and still access it. Although I think the newest version of Word has a web portal as well. So, to each their own. But you definitely want to be able to like keep these all together somewhere where you can look at them and you can review and, be willing to say you were wrong. It's such a big thing.
Yeah. And you're wrong for now.
Yeah, definitely. Like, there are definitely some brews that I've seen where I'm just like, I don't think that this is ever going to get there. But,
you saying Sorrow's Path will never be in a deck?
Sorrow's Path.
It's a rare.
It's a rare, isn't it? Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah,
Fallen Empires, right?
I don't know. It's a rare.
It's a bad card. Look up Sorrow's Path. I can't remember it off the top of my head. So, if you're really interested in bad rares from back in the day, go look up Sorrow's Path.
Yeah. It's sort of the quintessential example of just a card that's just so unplayable. A more modern version might be one with nothing.
Yeah. Okay, so back to the topic. Once you've done a lot of testing, go back and revisit the list, tighten it up, maybe you're seeing this one card a little too frequently. Like, you're seeing an answer that's kind of narrow and it's coming up just a little bit more than you want it. Maybe you shave one of those and put something else in its place.
I think something we mentioned earlier but sort of glossed over too is having people to test with is so important because you want to gather, third party, or I don't really know how you describe it, feedback for your deck. So you can be like, what did you think? What was weak? What weaknesses did you exploit? Like, how do you think it did against your deck? Like, that's so important. And, being able to bounce ideas off of you and one other person will really improve the quality of your builds.
And that's actually just great in general when you're like, even if you're playing an established deck and you're trying to get the hang of it, if you're playing in paper, just ask your opponent, like, hey, do you mind talking about like what you sided in against me?
Most people are more than happy. I generally give that information away at the end of the match anyway, because we know all the people who played our LGS already, like, personally. And I don't mind giving away that information because I think it strengthens our community as a whole.
Yeah, I definitely, like, if someone asks me, definitely, like, and usually I will offer up that information and just like, not only does it let them know kind of what answers you went for and whether their answers lined up well with yours, it also lets you ask, is there something in my sideboard that would have been better against you?
Yeah.
Like, should I have sideboarded in these other cards I wasn't sure about? And, as long as you're, friends with the person or at least passing acquaintances, you can definitely get like some more feedback that way.
Great.
I think that's a really good point you brought up.
Another thing I sort of want to hit on too, we said it like at the very beginning of the discussion, don't be afraid to use good cards. I feel like I feel like some people when they brew are like, well, I don't want to use anything that's established. And the thing is, these cards, people play these cards because they're good for a reason. Because they're good. So if you're a blue mid-range or control deck, you might as well put 4 Mold Drifters in your deck.
Yeah.
Like there's no reason not to. You're doing yourself a disservice by not playing cards that are inherently powerful.
Yes, definitely. Like, don't, unless you got a really good reason and you can produce double blue consistently on turn 2, you probably want to toss in a counterspell or 2.
Right.
And yeah, there's more interesting versions, but it is still just the most efficient counterspell in our format. Like
actual counterspell.
Yeah, actual counterspell. There's a
Which
reason.
is so funny because in Legacy it's not the greatest counterspell, right?
No. But I mean, Force of Will exists for a different reason.
There's also days.
Yeah. But don't shy away from cards you've seen in other lists. Like, if you really are dedicated to brewing something that's 100% unique, go for it. But these cards are good for a reason. As you said, like, Mulldrifter is probably one of the best creatures with an ETB draw effect.
Right. It's just so powerful.
I mean, people always, joke that it's a 2/2 that draws you 2 cards, and at worst, it's a divination at sorcery speed.
Right.
Like just pure upside.
Divination is a sorcery.
It is a sorcery, I know. I'm just clarifying.
I know.
We do have divination and instant speed effects with stipulations.
Yeah.
Artificer's Epiphany is the one that comes to mind.
Pig.
Big Pig, yeah. It's a weird divination. But, you know, also, like, try and get a handle on, like, the cards that are in this format, because there's a pretty deep pool. It's about 5,000 cards or so. Now, a lot of those are not good. Like, I'm straight up going to tell you.
No one's playing Healing Salve.
Yeah. Healing Salve is in the format. No one wants it. But, you know, kind of familiarize yourself with interesting cards. Like, if you have an afternoon, just sit there on, like, Gatherer or magiccards.info and just do a search for all the commons and just look through them and be like, oh, okay, that's interesting. Like, you know, maybe sit there with a pen and paper or a document and take notes and be like, oh man, that's a cool effect. That's a really unique effect.
Did you say that you use Decked Builder?
Yeah, on my phone.
That's also available on iPhone and on computer.
Oh, is it?
Yeah.
So okay, cool.
It's actually a very great tool. I didn't make the connection earlier when you said it. It's a very good tool.
Yeah, I really like it, especially because it stores the database of cards locally.
Right.
Because I have used that to brew on a plane. I once had a big flight to I'm forgetting where. I think it was I was heading home to see my parents, and I was like, all right, I'm gonna build a cube on my way home. And I did. And it was probably ill-advised because it was like midnight, like when I got on the plane, and I was up at like 4 a.m. building a cube in the air.
Hey Mike, you do you.
Yeah.
But it's a very, very strong tool.
Yes, definitely. I think, you know, definitely just like familiarizing yourself with what's available in the format, because being able to say like, oh, this would go great with, you know, a kitchen fink styled effect. Immediately, I can tell you off the top of my head, like, you got Lone Missionary and you got a Ration Cleric. Those are like your two premium, like, ETB gain life effects.
Mm-hmm.
But if you care about the persist half of it, you've got Rendclaw Trow and
Safehold Elite.
Safehold Elite. Or there's a Kelpie with persist as well.
Yeah.
It's green blue. Beside the point. Like, the better and more familiar you are with this format, the easier time you're going to have brewing, because you're going to be able to go, oh yeah, there's a card that does that, and I can't remember its exact name, but I remember like its power and toughness and its mana cost, so I can search for it really quickly.
Right.
Like, you don't need to know these off the top of your head. You just need to be able to say like, I have a vague understanding of this card that I remember existing. Let me double check what the name is.
Yeah, there are a lot of very, very powerful tools at your disposal. I think really we hit on the most important one, which is attitude. You know, don't give up, but at the same time, be humble and acknowledge when your deck probably isn't, you know, isn't the best. The other thing is, like you said, our format is pretty mapped out. There's a tier 0 deck in the format.
Yes,
and so like any brew you make is probably not going to be on that same power level, and I think keeping that in mind is also useful. But that doesn't mean that you can't either gun for the top deck or gun for the decks that beat the top deck.
Yeah, and you know, you can. If you 5-0 with a brew, like, that feels sweet. Like,
yeah,
I've definitely like brought in jank to F&M and gone like 3-1 and been like, oh, that was sweet. Like, you don't have to break the format in half.
And of course, having a rogue element to your deck is very powerful. You know, I've been playing Pig Trinket a lot at F&M, and I've been going 3-1 because people don't know how to interact with the deck.
I still think my favorite thing with that deck is every time I have played it, there's been at least one opponent who's like, I just don't know what to sideboard against you.
Yeah.
And it's like,
do you have Graveyard Hate?
Do you have Grave Hate? Like,
but sometimes even Grave Hate doesn't feel very good against Pig Trinket because it can still bury you in card advantage.
Yeah, there's just like, the rogue element is not to be ignored. Like, a really, really competent player, like a player who's super familiar with the format will probably have a pretty good idea of how to deal with it. Like Friday, I ran into a brew that had like, I was on Stompy. I ran into a brew that had like a lot of flyers, a lot of like low mana cost, counterspell effects, like just straight up counterspell. I think afterwards he showed me that he had Rune Snag in there. But it was like a blue-white flyers. I like Rune Snag. I think Rune Snag's good.
I think it's very good in the blue-green Threshold deck.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it would be good there. I've seen it in blue-black Delver as well. But when I was playing that matchup, I saw, you know, a Squadron Hawk. So I was like immediately like, Gut Shot's probably good here. He probably has Delvers, I was guessing. I think he did, yes. I think I saw a Delver game 1. But I can't, don't make me swear on that one, but I was able to go, okay, I'm sideboarding. Gut Shot's probably pretty good here. And he also had a Journey to Nowhere as removal. So I immediately was like, all right, Natural State comes in.
Mm-hmm.
So definitely like the more familiar you are with the format, the better you're going to be. This is definitely like a format that rewards knowledge of it.
Right.
Okay, but in all seriousness, you know, the more of the format you memorize, the better off you're going to be. It's also just going to make playing easier. Like, I'm not trying to like toot my own horn here, but like, I think for both of us, we rarely see cards played against us where we're like, what does that do?
Yeah.
Just because we've been playing long enough where we know like the top like 10% of cards we're likely to see.
Also, PSA, Mike will name the card you're casting before you cast it. It's an intimidation tactic. I made it my mission to educate the masses about your duplicity, Mike.
It's part intimidation tactic, part me trying to make sure that I know what they're going to play.
Yeah. It also is very tilting.
Oh yeah, some people do not care for that behavior at all.
I think the secret is to just cut him off before he says it, and then just play with your hand face up.
Well, I mean, like when I'm doing that, I'm also like testing myself to be like, all right, 3 mana out of this deck.
He's always
what
right,
is the
though.
most likely thing?
He's always right. Yeah. Sorry, I'm just giving Mike a hard time. He knows I love him.
I know. It's just it's a really fun little game for me.
It's a game within a game. He's
all right. So for getting back on topic with the brewing,
sorry.
like again, definitely like good attitude going in. You know, you are not infallible, and I'm not infallible, and I've played some janky brews. Like, I mean, I'm sure there's something you've like tried out in Affinity where you're just like, wow, that was terrible. Like
Teamer Battle Rage. Still don't understand why people play it.
Didn't you just get beaten on stream by Teamer Battle Rage
I
the
did.
other day?
It was, all right. It was good. It was good in one situation. That doesn't make it a good card.
But like we all make mistakes. And the important thing is learning from them instead of kind of having that gut reaction of like, well, I don't make mistakes. Like the best brewers I've ever met are people who are just like super willing to be like, well, I was wrong.
Yeah. And like, that's not to say you can't defend your choices.
Yes.
Right? Like, you know, if you have a choice and you think it's the better choice and someone says they don't think it's a good choice, you can engage in a dialogue, but you definitely shouldn't shut down and be like, well, that's just what I want to play. Although,
you can. Like if you're dedicated to playing a card, you know, that's a pet card or something like that, go for it. Like we're not here to tell you to stop it, but you know, if you ask for feedback, be responsive to that feedback and try and foster constructive criticism. Like I went to art school, and one of the big things there is, you know, every time you bring in work that you're working on, the whole class is going to critique it. And you're going to get, in my case, like up to 12 people saying the harshest things they think about your work. And I definitely feel like that rubbed off on me in terms of like brewing, because I'm used to people like getting like very aggressive during critiques.
And you know what they say, my genius is never rewarded in its own time.
But like definitely try and foster like a constructive criticism, like ask for like opinions from people, especially other brewers. Like being able to like brew with a group is great. Like having like 4 or 5 people bouncing ideas off one another is really, really powerful, because you've got like, instead of brewing on your own where you have just your knowledge base, you've got person A, B, and C to help you out.
Mm-hmm.
And they can be like, oh, well, you know, you're running this, but there's also this version of it. And, you know, based on the meta, I think this might be a better choice. Like, you know, Natural State, for example, 1 green, destroy a artifact or enchantment with mana cost 3, converted mana cost 3 or less. Like, I think I've gotten rid of like most of my Gleeful Sabotages and stuff out of boards, and I'm pretty much running mostly Natural State because I just love the ability to nuke lands.
I love the ability to not get 2 for 1, so thank you for your service.
I still run a Miser's copy of Gleeful, but you know, just being able to bounce ideas off people is really good, especially if they're like-minded and they've been there from the get-go in terms of you brewing this deck. So, 2 people working together is better than 1. 3 people working together is probably better than 2. And I'm sure there's too many cooks in the kitchen point, but also definitely use resources like Reddit. Like I see deck critique threads there all the time.
Yeah.
Important thing, please use the casual and spike tags if you're going to go there. It saves people a lot of time and it saves a lot of, bad criticism.
Yeah.
If you're throwing together a casual deck that you just want to goof around with, you really don't want someone coming in and being like, just play Burn. Burn's a better deck. Or
is it?
I mean, I'm sure that there is a situation where Burn is the better deck in comparison to a Brew.
Yes.
But definitely try and make use of resources. I like to keep my brews really under wraps until I'm happy with them. So I can just kind of have that moment of here is a tuned brew. I'm going to come and 4-0 this F&M. I'm just going to come and wreck face because I have spent weeks or months on this trying to tune it. So there's definitely an enjoyment for me in debuting a tuned deck, but you can throw it up on Tapped Out or, put it on Reddit or, solicit advice from strangers. All right, we're pulling up on an hour. I feel like that was a good episode. I feel like we've imparted some knowledge upon the people.
Yeah, sure. They're not worse off than when they started listening, that's for sure. Well,
oh man, I want to use that as a slogan on our logo.
they're not worse off than when we started. Or just, in quotes, meh. All right, why don't you go ahead and take us out, Mike?
All right, that's all we got for today. Thanks to Pat's Games for giving us a place to play weekly Pauper. Thanks to L for the use of his song Quantitative as our theme music. His music can be found on SoundCloud under the name LLL. Remember to subscribe on YouTube, follow us on Twitter, like us on Facebook. We're also on iTunes. And if you're going to subscribe there, please leave a rating and preferably a written review. It only takes a couple seconds, and it really helps us in search results for Magic-related podcasts. If you have a discussion topic or a deck list that you'd like us to discuss on the show, you can either use the contact form on our website or email us directly at colorcommentary@gmail.com. We're trying to do a mailbag episode soon, so if people want to send in questions on any topic,
literally, we are not ashamed of our lives.
If you want to ask me what some of my favorite easy comfort food recipes are, I will answer that.
Okay, well that's not nearly as bad as what I was thinking, but yeah, sure, we'll go with that.
But Magic questions, anything. We definitely want to do a Q&A, kind of get to know the host deal. So if you email us either through the contact form or directly by emailing us at colorcommentary@gmail.com, once we've got enough, we're going to do a mailbag episode. It'll be fun. We'll get to reveal personal secrets.
And I actually have to do a real special shout out before we get off.
Yeah,
here.
Go for it.
Shout out to Logan White, Pat's Games. He gave me 2 foil pith drillers to brew with. And that card it's a sleeper, man. It's a sleeper.
All right. Well, I'm Michael Petchek.
I'm Adrian Guarzales.
Signing off for Color Commentary.